In an age that's filled with populists and strongmen, one leader really tried to take a different path, not with big rallies and loud rhetoric, but with reason and reform. This is the story of France's Emmanuel Macron, and, well, the pretty high price he paid for betting on logic in a world that often feels like it's ruled by emotion. Let's get into it.
And this right here, this really gets to the heart of it all. I mean, think about the leaders who actually make it into the history books. They're usually the firebrands, the revolutionaries, right? Macron, he was just different. He didn't storm the palace. He walked in with spreadsheets, philosophy books, and this quiet but, man, intense belief that he had the right answers.
And that single belief, it frames his entire presidency. It's like he was trying to surf the calm waters of logic, but he was constantly being chased by this tidal wave of public anger. It's a classic story, really, the head versus the heart of a nation. And Macron learned, the hard way, that the heart often wins.
So how in the world did this quiet intellectual end up running one of the world's great powers? To really understand the president, you gotta go back and look at the man before he ever got near the palace. He was an outsider, for sure, but maybe not in the way you'd think.
See, his background wasn't in glad-handing and campaigning. It was in philosophy. He wasn't really interested in learning how to manipulate a crowd. He wanted to understand what makes an individual tick. It was all about the mechanics of the mind, not the roar of the mob.
And this intellectual foundation is just so key to understanding him. His heroes were thinkers, not warriors. And that shaped a worldview that was based on pure reason, where the best, most logical idea, well, it should always win. A really noble belief, but one that was about to crash head-on into the messy, messy reality of politics.
So you can kind of map out his unique journey here. First, he was at the bank, where he learned the cold, hard language of numbers and efficiency. Then he went into government, where he saw firsthand the slow, grinding gears of bureaucracy. And finally, just in his personal life, by always being the outsider, he learned solitude. He wasn't out there building a political machine. He was building this powerful belief in himself, and himself alone.
Okay, so let's see how all of that shaped his presidency. He comes into office when France is just exhausted, and he's immediately faced with this fundamental choice that's going to define everything.
And this was the brutal choice right in front of him. On one side, he could push through all the painful but necessary reforms that he believed in and be hated for it. Or, on the other side, he could just preserve the status quo, keep things comfortable, and watch France slowly decline from the inside. He chose to change the system.
And his approach to this was pure logic. He moved methodically, one step at a time, targeting France's biggest, most deep-rooted problems. He went after the rigid labor laws, the unsustainable pension system, a stagnant economy. On paper, it was a textbook case of rational, smart reform.
But this is where the big disconnect started. Macron was up there presenting charts and data, explaining all the long-term benefits of his ideas. But the public, they just felt the short-term pain, the disruption, the fear, the uncertainty. He was speaking a rational language that just didn't connect with the emotional reality on the ground.
And that disconnect wasn't just some political problem he could manage, it was a fuse. And, well, it was about to be lit. The theoretical debate between logic and emotion exploded into a very real fire on the streets of Paris.
You can almost just picture the scene, can't you? The Yellow Vest protests are absolutely raging. Glass is shattering, sirens are wailing everywhere, and inside the palace, Macron is just watching his city burn on TV screens. This was the moment his whole intellectual approach collided with raw, unfiltered public fury.
And you have to understand, what he was seeing wasn't just a protest against a fuel tax or some specific policy. No, this was a visceral, personal rejection of him, of his style, of what people saw as the arrogance of his logic. It was a nation screaming at its leader, "You do not understand us."
This is the question that must have just been burning in his mind that night. I mean, all the data said he was right. The economic models, the charts, the projections, they all backed up his decisions. But when you look out your window and you see your country in flames, are you still right? It's a question that cuts right to the very heart of what leadership is.
And this is the lesson that was learned in the fire. Leadership isn't an equation you can just solve. It's an emotional contract. It's about making millions of people feel that the person in charge actually gets their lives, their fears, their hopes. And that night, Macron had to realize he'd broken that contract.
So, what was the long-term consequence of this rational, always-in-the-middle approach? Well, in a word, loneliness. And this really shows you the result, just total political isolation. By standing in what he saw as the rational center, he was getting attacked from all sides.
He was too liberal for the conservatives, way too capitalist for the left, and too pro-Europe for the nationalists. In trying to be the president for everyone, he kind of ended up belonging to no one.
And as other crises hit, the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, Macron was praised on the world stage for his calm, measured leadership. But that very same calmness created distance at home. People don't chant for competence, they chant for passion. He was a good manager, but he really struggled to be an inspiring leader.
Okay, so as we start to wrap this up, what are the big takeaways from Macron's story? What does his presidency really teach us about leadership in this modern world of ours?
I think it boils down to these core lessons. His story shows that being smart without empathy just comes across as arrogance. You can't force reform on people if they don't trust you. It just creates resistance. And maybe the hardest lesson of all, leadership is an emotional contract first and a logical one second. You've got to win the heart before you can ever hope to persuade the mind.
At the end of the day, this was the ultimate lesson that France taught its very logical president. You can't just optimize a country like it's a machine. A nation is a collective identity. It's a shared history, a whole web of fears and dreams. It's a feeling. And a leader who forgets that, well, they do so at their own peril.
So what's the final takeaway here? Look, Macron tried to govern without the easy lies and the populist promises that define so much of our politics today. He told people what he thought they needed to hear, not what they wanted to hear, and he paid a heavy price for it, which leaves us all with a really difficult question. In an age of so much anger and emotion, is there still any room left for a leader who chooses to be right rather than just be popular?